On the morning of February 10th, 2010, Jim Capullo woke up to find his world inextricably changed. He lived in the quiet town of Sandwich, Massachusetts, a village on Cape Cod, where in the winter, nearly nothing ever seemed to happen. Jim Capullo had been taking care of his sickly grandmother for several weeks, and he had awoken that morning to the sound of her yelling. This was common, as her hearing had become very bad, and yelling was often necessary on both their parts. He ran down the stairs so quickly that he was hardly aware of, at the time, how the color and texture of the walls had changed from the day before, as they were now padded with old blankets and quilts from floor to ceiling. What he was aware of was that his grandmother was wearing a thick winter jacket, a hat, and gloves in the middle of the house. He tried to ask her why she was dressed like this, but she was too erratic and far too hard of hearing to give him any answer. Mr. Capullo stressed several times during his recollection of the events of the 10th that it had not been very cold the day before. It was unseasonably warm, and that these preparations for the cold were, to him, unnecessary. According to his account, Jim suddenly heard the voice of his brother calling him from the kitchen. Mr. Capullo was completely taken aback by this, as he had not seen his brother for several months, and his brother had not been staying with his grandmother for quite some years. Mr. Capullo went into the kitchen, realizing at this time that the nature of the home had changed. He found his brother on the phone, writing something down with a strange old-fashioned pen on unlined paper. He asked his brother when he'd arrived, and if everything was all right. His brother was very busy, writing as quickly as he could, often crossing things out and every now and then speaking words that sounded like Portuguese or Spanish. As he hung up the phone, Jim told his brother that it was good to see him again, at which point his brother asked what he meant, stating that he had been on site for hours. It was at this point that Mr. Capullo realized that his grandmother was still yelling, something about a prescription called Xerophonics that his grandmother had, to his knowledge, never taken before. Jim then claimed that it was at this point that he noticed it was very dark out, and while the clock read that it was in fact 9:30 a.m., it looked as if it were the middle of. For reasons that were never fully explained by Mr. Capullo, a significant amount of time in his recollection then passes without any memorable details, other than his brother asking him at one point if there was something wrong with his face. By about 11 o'clock a.m., Mr. Capullo remembered standing on the front lawn in night-like silence, stating that he and a little girl who lived across the street were throwing 2 frisbees, one red and one green, to her dog. He said that he had never met the girl before, and that while he could not recall her name, she was about 7 years old and had long blonde hair, and she appeared, according to him, as if she were going to church with her family on St. Patrick's Day. He also stated that the girl had only one arm. The dog was an old Irish setter, and it would always go for the red frisbee, over and over again, even though every time they threw the discs, a red-tailed hawk would swoop down and pick up the red one, sometimes fighting with the dog, and one time scratching its underbelly. It is worth noting that, though Jim Capullo was asked multiple times by a wide array of experts, most of whom captured audio and video recordings of his account, he consistently seemed unaware of the bizarre nature of this story. His acceptance of the nature of the events was always under question until he came to the point where there was a lapse in time, at which point he would consistently become confused, even when asked very simple questions as to the state of affairs and the condition of his soundness of mind. It is worth noting that he was not under the influence of any drugs or medications, and after thorough investigations, it was determined that Mr. Capullo was at no time suffering from any form of mental illness.